In the glittering world of royal protocol, where every piece of jewelry tells a story of power, tradition, and unspoken rivalries, one necklace would become the center of a drama that would shake the very foundations of the British royal family. When Queen Camilla stepped out wearing a particular diamond necklace that had once adorned another royal neck, she unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would expose long-buried tensions, challenge centuries-old traditions, and force King Charles to make an impossible choice between his wife and his legacy. This is the true story of how a single piece of jewelry became a weapon in the most sophisticated game of royal chess ever played. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Clarence House as Queen Camilla stood before her jewelry collection, her fingers trailing over the velvet-lined drawers that held centuries of royal treasures. Today was different from other days. Today, she would attend the annual Children's Charity Gala, an event that would be closely watched by both the media and the royal family members who still questioned her every move. Angela, her personal dresser, carefully laid out the navy blue Oscar de la Renta gown on the four-poster bed. The dress was elegant, sophisticated, and perfectly appropriate for a queen consort. But as Camilla's eyes scanned the jewelry options, something stirred within her, a feeling she had been suppressing for months, perhaps years. Since becoming queen consort, Camilla had navigated the treacherous waters of royal protocol with careful precision. Every appearance was calculated, every gesture measured against the expectations of a monarchy that had grudgingly accepted her after decades of controversy. She had earned her place through patience, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to Charles. Yet, despite her official title, she often felt like an outsider looking in at a family that had finally, reluctantly, made room for her. The Chapman diamond necklace caught her eye as morning light struck its surface, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the room. The piece was magnificent, a cascade of perfectly matched diamonds set in platinum, with a central pendant that had once belonged to Queen Mary herself. But this necklace carried more than just monetary value. It held emotional weight that could shift the entire dynamic of the royal family. Camilla knew the necklace's history intimately. It had been gifted to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, by Queen Elizabeth II just 3 years earlier, on the occasion of her 10th wedding anniversary to William. The gesture had been significant. Elizabeth rarely gave away pieces from the crown jewels collection to family members who weren't direct heirs. The necklace had been photographed extensively during Catherine's subsequent appearances, becoming almost synonymous with her image as the future Queen of England. But here it was, in Camilla's possession. Charles had quietly arranged for its transfer just 2 months ago, claiming that as queen consort, Camilla should have access to the finest pieces in the collection. The move had been conducted with such discretion that even the palace staff weren't entirely aware of the transaction. Catherine hadn't worn the necklace since Christmas, and palace records showed it had been returned to the vault for cleaning and assessment. Angela noticed Camilla's fixation on the necklace and approached carefully. The older woman had served the royal family for over 20 years and understood the delicate nature of royal jewelry politics better than most. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "perhaps the sapphire set would complement the gown beautifully?" Camilla picked up the Chapman necklace, feeling its weight in her hands. Each diamond seemed to pulse with its own inner fire, and she could almost hear the whispers of the women who had worn it before her. Queen Mary had worn it to state banquets in the 1920s. Elizabeth had chosen it for important diplomatic events, and Catherine had made it her signature piece for the most significant moments of her royal journey. "No, Angela," Camilla said finally, her voice carrying a determination that surprised even herself. This is the one I'll wear tonight." Angela's face remained carefully neutral, but Camilla caught the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before she nodded. The dresser understood the implications better than anyone. This wasn't simply about choosing jewelry. This was about making a statement that would reverberate through the corridors of every royal residence. As Angela fastened the necklace around Camilla's neck, the queen consort stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The diamonds transformed her appearance entirely. The navy gown, which had seemed elegant but unremarkable moments before, now appeared regal, commanding. The necklace elevated her presence from that of a consort to that of a true queen. But it wasn't just about how she looked. Wearing Catherine's necklace was about claiming her rightful place in the hierarchy that had been established long before she arrived. It was about asserting that her marriage to Charles meant something beyond mere romantic love. It meant she deserved the same respect, the same access to royal treasures, the same recognition as any other queen in the monarchy's long history. The decision felt both impulsive and inevitable. Camilla had spent years walking on eggshells, carefully avoiding any action that might be perceived as overstepping her bounds. She had watched as Catherine was celebrated and embraced by the public in ways that she herself never would be. The younger woman's grace, beauty, and natural charisma had made her the darling of the British people, while Camilla remained the controversial figure who had broken up a fairy tale marriage. But today something had shifted. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence that came with finally holding the title of queen. Perhaps it was the realization that she had spent too many years apologizing for loving Charles, and not enough time embracing the power that came with that love. Or perhaps it was simply the understanding that if she didn't claim her space in this family, no one else would claim it for her. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Angela answered with practiced discretion before turning to Camilla with a slight frown. "Your Majesty, it's His Majesty's private secretary. The king would like to see you in his study before you depart for the gala." Charles was waiting for her in the wood-paneled study that had served as his sanctuary for decades. The room smelled of leather and old books, with touches of his beloved watercolors adorning the walls. He looked up from his desk as she entered, and Camilla watched as his expression changed from affectionate greeting to something far more complex. His eyes went immediately to the necklace, and she saw recognition flash across his features. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The diamonds seemed to catch every ray of light in the room, making it impossible for Charles to look anywhere else. "Darling," he said finally, his voice carefully measured, "you look absolutely stunning." But Camilla could read the subtext in his tone. Charles was a master of diplomatic language, and she had learned to translate his careful phrases over their years together. What he meant was, "You look beautiful, but what exactly are you trying to accomplish?" "Thank you," she replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I thought it was time I started wearing some of the pieces from the collection. After all, they're meant to be seen, not hidden away in vaults." Charles leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity he usually reserved for matters of state. That particular piece, it's been quite prominent in recent years. The understatement hung in the air between them. They both knew that Catherine had worn the necklace to some of the most photographed events of her royal career. Her portrait wearing it had appeared on the cover of Vogue. She had chosen it for William's investiture ceremony and for their attendance at the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm. "It's a beautiful piece," Camilla said evenly, "and it belongs to the crown, not to any individual." Charles nodded slowly, but she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was thinking about Catherine's reaction, about William's response, about the media storm that might erupt when photographers captured Camilla wearing what the press had dubbed Kate's favorite necklace. "Of course it does," he agreed. "I just want to make sure you've considered all the implications." The word implications carried enormous weight in royal circles. It wasn't just about hurt feelings or family drama. Every royal appearance was scrutinized for symbolic meaning. The press would analyze every aspect of Camilla's choice, from the timing to the specific event. They would compare photographs, create timelines, and craft narratives about power struggles and family tensions. "I've considered them," Camilla replied, her voice remaining steady despite the way her heart was racing. "Charles, I've spent years being careful, being diplomatic, being understanding. But I'm a queen consort now. That title comes with both responsibilities and privileges." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I love Catherine dearly. She's been gracious and welcoming since the day William brought her into this family. But I can't spend the rest of my reign walking around the jewelry collection like it's a minefield, afraid to touch anything that someone else might have a sentimental attachment to. Charles was quiet for a long moment, and Camilla could practically see him weighing options. His loyalty to her was absolute, but his desire to maintain family harmony was equally strong. As king, he had to balance personal relationships with institutional stability. "You're absolutely right," he said finally. "The collection belongs to the crown, and you have every right to access any piece in it." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I suspect Angela tried to steer you toward the sapphires?" Despite the tension of the moment, Camilla laughed. "She did indeed. But sometimes a woman knows exactly what she needs to wear." Charles stood and walked around the desk to where she sat. He took her hands in his, and she could feel the weight of his kingship in that simple gesture. "Then, wear it beautifully, my darling, and hold your head high." As they prepared to leave for the gala, Camilla felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through her veins. She had crossed a line tonight, though exactly where that line led remained to be seen. The Chapman necklace felt heavier around her neck now, weighted not just with diamonds, but with the full force of royal tradition and family politics. The car ride to the gala was quiet, with Charles occasionally glancing at her profile as London's evening lights played across the necklace's surface. Camilla stared out the window, watching the city pass by, knowing that by the end of this evening, her relationship with Catherine, and possibly with the entire royal family, would be forever changed. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The Children's Charity Gala at the Royal Opera House was one of London's most anticipated events of the social season. As Camilla stepped out of the royal car, the flash of cameras created a strobe light effect against the historic building's facade. Photographers called her name, their voices mixing into an indecipherable chorus of requests and commands. But it was the moment when the professional lighting caught the diamonds around her neck that the energy of the crowd shifted perceptibly. James Mitchell, a veteran royal photographer who had covered the monarchy for 3 decades, lowered his camera with a look of genuine surprise. He had photographed this necklace dozens of times over the past 3 years, and his trained eye immediately recognized the Chapman diamonds. But seeing them on Camilla instead of Catherine created a cognitive dissonance that left him momentarily speechless. "Is that?" whispered Sarah Chun, a correspondent for the BBC, to her cameraman. She didn't need to finish the question. Anyone who had followed the royal family closely would recognize the significance of what they were witnessing. Inside the opera house, Camilla moved through the receiving line with practiced grace, accepting compliments on her appearance and making small talk with the charity's benefactors and supporters. But she was acutely aware of the ripple effect her jewelry choice was creating throughout the room. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people noticed the necklace. Women who had seen Catherine wear it on countless occasions did double takes, their expressions ranging from confused to intrigued to quietly scandalized. Lady Pemberton, a longtime friend of the royal family and a formidable presence in London's charitable circles, approached Camilla with the kind of diplomatic smile that barely concealed her fascination. "Your Majesty," she said, her eyes explicitly drawn to the diamonds. "What an absolutely stunning choice for this evening." The emphasis on the word choice was subtle but unmistakable. In royal circles, nothing was ever said directly, but everything was communicated perfectly. "Thank you, Lady Pemberton," Camilla replied smoothly. "I thought it was time to give this beautiful piece another moment in the spotlight." Meanwhile, at Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, Catherine was finishing her own evening routine when her phone began buzzing with messages. The first few she ignored. Royal life often generated unnecessary drama on social media. But when her private secretary called, she knew something significant had happened. "Catherine," Emma Richardson's voice was carefully controlled. "I think you should see the photos from tonight's gala." Catherine's laptop was already open on her dressing table, and within moments she was staring at high-resolution images of Camilla wearing the Chapman necklace. The photos were professionally taken, clearly showing every detail of the jewelry that had become so personally significant to Catherine over the past 3 years. William walked into their bedroom just as Catherine was scrolling through the images, and he immediately noticed the tension in her posture. "What is it?" he asked, settling onto the bed beside her. Without speaking, Catherine turned the laptop toward him. William's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His jaw tightened in the way it did when he was trying to control his temper, and Catherine could see the muscles in his neck tensing. "She's wearing your necklace," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. "It's not technically my necklace," Catherine replied quietly, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "It belongs to the crown." But both of them knew that ownership in the royal family was far more complex than legal technicalities. The necklace had been given to Catherine by the late Queen Elizabeth II with specific intention and ceremony. It had been photographed extensively during Catherine's most important royal moments. In the public's mind, and in the family's understanding, it had become intrinsically linked to Catherine's identity as the future queen. William was already reaching for his phone, his thumb moving across the screen with sharp, decisive gestures. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "William, wait," Catherine said, placing her hand over his. "Let's think about this carefully before we do anything." But even as she counseled caution, Catherine felt a wave of emotions she hadn't expected. There was hurt, certainly. The necklace represented not just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol of her acceptance into the royal family, a tangible connection to the grandmother-in-law who had become such an important figure in her life. There was also confusion about how the transfer had happened without her knowledge, and a growing sense that she had somehow been outmaneuvered in a game she hadn't realized she was playing. Back at the gala, Charles was experiencing his own complicated emotions as he watched his wife work the room. He was proud of her confidence and poise, but he was also calculating the potential fallout from her jewelry choice. His phone had been vibrating continuously throughout the evening. Messages from his private secretary, from palace communication staff, and, most recently, from William. During a brief break between scheduled appearances, Charles managed to step aside and read William's text. "Father, we need to talk. First thing tomorrow morning." The message was polite, but unmistakably urgent. Charles understood his son's position completely. William had always been protective of Catherine, especially when it came to her place within the royal hierarchy. The Prince of Wales had worked hard to ensure that his wife was respected and honored within the family structure, and he would see Camilla's choice as a direct challenge to that carefully constructed dynamic. Charles typed back quickly, "Of course, my study at 10. As the evening progressed, Camilla found herself energized by the subtle drama she had created. For years, she had felt like she was constantly deferring to others within the family, always conscious of her position as the second wife, the controversial figure who had to work twice as hard for half the acceptance. Tonight, she felt like a queen in the truest sense, confident, powerful, and unapologetic about claiming her rightful place. During the charity auction, when she stood to bid on a painting by a young artist whose work supported children's literacy programs, the diamonds caught the spotlight and seemed to announce her presence to the entire room. She could feel the weight of attention, but instead of the anxiety it usually produced, she found herself thriving under the scrutiny. Victoria Hartwell, a sharp-eyed journalist from the Times, was taking notes throughout the evening. She had covered royal events for 15 years and understood that tonight's jewelry choice represented a significant shift in family dynamics. Her article would be read carefully by royal watchers around the world, and she knew that the way she framed Camilla's decision would influence public perception for months to come. "This isn't just about a necklace," Victoria murmured to her photographer as they captured Camilla's animated conversation with the charity's young beneficiaries. "This is about establishing a new order within the family. Camilla is saying she's not going to play second fiddle anymore." The photographer, Marcus Webb, nodded as he adjusted his lens. "Look at her body language," he observed. "She's not defensive or apologetic. She's owning this moment completely." Indeed, Camilla's demeanor throughout the evening was that of a woman who had made a calculated decision and was prepared to stand behind it. She posed for photos with the charity's leadership, chatted easily with other royal family members in attendance, and gave a brief but impactful speech about the importance of supporting disadvantaged children. But it was during the networking portion of the evening that the most significant conversation of the night took place. Princess and Charles's sister and one of the most straightforward members of the royal family approached Camilla near the champagne reception. "Interesting choice tonight, Camilla," and said, her tone characteristically direct. "I assume you knew this would create quite a stir." Camilla respected his honesty and had always appreciated that the Princess Royal said exactly what she meant. "I did," she replied simply. "Sometimes stirring things up is necessary for progress," and studied her sister-in-law's face for a moment before nodding slowly. "Good for you," she said, surprising Camilla with her response. This family has a tendency to get too comfortable with unspoken rules and unofficial hierarchies. Perhaps it's time someone challenged them. The validation from and meant more to Camilla than she had expected. The Princess Royal was universally respected within the family for her work ethic and her loyalty to the crown. If and approved of her choice, it suggested that Camilla wasn't simply being rebellious. She was asserting legitimate rights that had been previously unrecognized. As the evening wound down, Camilla felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. She had accomplished exactly what she had set out to do. She had worn one of the crown's most significant pieces of jewelry with confidence and style. She had demonstrated her rightful place as queen consort, and she had sent a clear message to anyone who might question her authority or her access to royal privileges. The car ride home was quiet, with Charles seemingly lost in thought as London's evening lights streamed past the windows. Camilla could sense his internal struggle, pride in her confidence, warring with concern about the family repercussions they would face in the coming days. "You handled everything beautifully tonight," he said finally, as they pulled into Clarence's house. "Thank you," Camilla replied. "I felt beautiful tonight. Powerful. Like I finally understood what it truly means to be queen." Charles took her hand as they walked up the steps to their residence. "Tomorrow might be challenging," he warned gently. Camilla squeezed his hand in response. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." But even as she spoke those brave words, Camilla knew that she had fundamentally altered the family dynamic with her choice tonight. The necklace around her neck felt heavier now, weighted not just with diamonds, but with the full implications of what she had set in motion. In bedrooms across London and Windsor, other members of the royal family were having their own conversations about the evening's events. Text messages were being sent, phone calls were being made, and positions were being taken that would shape the family's response to Camilla's bold statement. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. The morning after the gala dawned gray and drizzly, as if London weather was reflecting the tension that had settled over the royal household. By 7 a.m., Buckingham Palace's communications team was already in crisis mode, fielding calls from media outlets around the world who had picked up on the significance of Camilla's jewelry choice. Rebecca Morrison, the palace's head of communications, stood in her office surrounded by newspaper clippings and tablet screens showing social media feeds. The story had exploded overnight in ways that even she, with 15 years of royal media management experience, hadn't fully anticipated. The Daily Mail's headline read, "Queen Camilla's Power Play. Royal steps out in Kate's signature necklace." The Times was more subtle with a new chapter. Queen Consort embraces crown jewels collection. But it was the international coverage that concerned Rebecca most. American media were framing it as a royal family feud, while European outlets were analyzing it as a shift in monarchical hierarchy. "Ma'am," her assistant knocked on the door. "The king's private secretary has called 3 times. His Majesty wants to see you before his 10 o'clock meeting with the Prince of Wales." At Windsor Castle, Catherine was having her own difficult morning. She had barely slept, her mind replaying images of Camilla wearing the necklace that had become so deeply personal to her. The piece wasn't just jewelry. It represented her acceptance by Queen Elizabeth II, her transition from commoner to royal, and her preparation for eventually becoming queen herself. Louise, her personal assistant, approached carefully as Catherine sat in the morning room with her untouched breakfast. "Ma'am, there have been several calls from friends and family. Everyone's seen the photos." Catherine nodded absently, staring out at the castle grounds where her children were playing with their nanny. She had spent the night thinking about how to respond, weighing her options between confrontation and strategic silence. William had been less contemplative. He had already sent several terse messages to his father and was clearly preparing for battle. "Has Prince William left for his meeting?" Catherine asked. 20 minutes ago, ma'am. He said he would call you immediately afterward." At Clarence's house, Camilla was experiencing a very different kind of morning. She felt energized, purposeful, and more confident in her role than she had since becoming queen consort. The media attention, rather than intimidating her, served as validation that her message had been received loud and clear. Angela brought her morning tea and the newspaper clippings, watching Camilla's face carefully for any signs of regret or second thoughts. Instead, she saw a woman who looked genuinely pleased with the storm she had created. "The palace communications team has been quite busy this morning, Your Majesty," Angela said diplomatically. "I imagine they have," Camilla replied, sipping her tea as she scanned the headlines. "Good. It's been too long since anyone paid attention to what the queen consort was doing." But even Camilla's confidence couldn't completely shield her from the knowledge that this morning's meeting between Charles and William would be crucial in determining how this family drama would ultimately resolve. At exactly 10 o'clock, William arrived at his father's study at Clarence's house. The Prince of Wales looked every inch the future king, tall, composed, and carrying himself with the authority that came from years of public service and constitutional preparation. But Charles could see the anger simmering beneath his son's diplomatic exterior. "Good morning, Papa," William said, taking the chair across from Charles's desk with movements that were just slightly too controlled to be casual. "William." Charles set down his pen and gave his son his full attention. "I assume this is about last night." "It is." William's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath the politeness. "I need to understand how my wife's necklace ended up around Camilla's neck without anyone thinking to mention it to us first." Charles had spent much of the sleepless night preparing for this conversation, but hearing William's direct challenge still made him uncomfortable. As king, he had absolute authority over the crown jewels collection. As a father, he wanted to maintain harmony between his wife and his son. These two roles were now in direct conflict. "The Chapman necklace belongs to the crown," Charles said carefully. "It was never Catherine's personal property." "Don't." William's interruption was sharp, more emotion bleeding through than either man was used to. "Please don't insult my intelligence with technicalities. Grandmother gave that necklace to Catherine specifically. It was photographed, documented, and celebrated as part of Catherine's integration into this family. Everyone understood it was hers to wear." Charles leaned back in his chair, recognizing that this conversation was going to be more difficult than he had hoped. "William, I understand your frustration, but Camilla is queen consort now. She needs access to appropriate jewelry for her royal duties." "There are hundreds of appropriate pieces in the collection," William replied, his voice rising slightly. "Why that specific one? Why the one that has become synonymous with my wife's public image?" The question hung in the air between them, and Charles realized that any answer he gave would be inadequate. The truth was complicated. Camilla had chosen the necklace precisely because of its significance, and he had allowed it because he believed she deserved to claim her full status within the family. But explaining that to William would only make the situation worse. "Son," Charles said, switching to a more personal tone, "Camilla has been incredibly patient and gracious during her transition to queen consort. She's been careful not to step on anyone's toes, perhaps too careful. Last night was about her finally embracing her role fully." "At Catherine's expense," William said flatly. "This wasn't about embracing anything. This was about taking something that belonged to someone else and using it to make a point." Charles felt his own temper beginning to rise. Catherine is not the only woman in this family who deserves respect and recognition. Camilla has earned her place here through decades of service and devotion. I've never questioned Camilla's service, William replied, his voice becoming more controlled as his father's became more heated. Your Majesty, he said, forgive the intrusion, but the Prime Minister's office has called. Apparently, there are questions about last night's jewelry choice that have reached the government level. Both Charles and William stared at the secretary in disbelief. The idea that a family dispute over jewelry had escalated to involve the Prime Minister was both absurd and deeply concerning. What kind of questions? Charles asked. About protocol, sir. About the proper procedures for transferring significant pieces from the crown jewels collection. There are apparently concerns about documentation and precedent. William's expression darkened further. So now this has become a constitutional issue. After the secretary left, father and son sat in uncomfortable silence for several moments. The magnitude of what Camilla's choice had set in motion was becoming clear to both of them. William, Charles said finally, what do you want me to do? The necklace is already in Camilla's possession. Last night's photos are already published around the world. We can't undo what's happened. I want you to acknowledge that this was handled poorly, William replied. I want assurance that future decisions about significant pieces will be made with proper consultation. And I want Catherine to know that her contributions to this family are valued and protected. Charles studied his son's face, recognizing in William's expression the same stubborn determination that he himself had inherited from Queen Elizabeth II. This wasn't just about a necklace anymore. It was about William establishing boundaries around his wife's position within the family, and about him asserting his role as heir to the throne. You have my word that future decisions will be handled differently, Charles said. But, William, you also need to understand that Camilla is my wife and my queen consort. I won't allow her to be treated as a second-class member of this family. I'm not asking you to, William replied. The conversation had been carefully diplomatic, but Catherine could hear the concern in her mother's voice. Darling, Carol had said, are you quite all right with all of this attention? I'm fine, Mom, Catherine had replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. These things happen in families. It will all blow over. But Catherine knew it wouldn't simply blow over. The public attention was intense, but more importantly, the family dynamics had shifted in a way that couldn't be easily reversed. Camilla had claimed a new level of authority within the royal hierarchy, and Catherine would need to decide how to respond. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister-in-law, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. Thinking of you today. Call if you need to talk. The support was appreciated, but Catherine realized that she was essentially alone in navigating this situation. The other women in the family had their own relationships with Camilla and their own positions to protect. Catherine would need to find her own path forward. When William finally returned from his meeting with Charles, Catherine could see from his expression that the conversation hadn't gone as he had hoped. How bad was it? She asked. William sat down heavily beside her. Bad. He's defending her choice completely. Says she has every right to wear any piece in the collection. Technically, he's correct, Catherine said quietly. Catherine, don't, William said, echoing his father's earlier words. This isn't about technicalities. This is about respect and consideration, and Camilla showed you neither. Catherine was quiet for a moment, processing not just what had happened, but what it meant for her future within the royal family. She had always been careful to maintain good relationships with all family members, including Camilla. She had worked hard to project an image of unity and cooperation. But Camilla's actions had forced her into a position where she would need to be more assertive about protecting her own interests. What do we do now? She asked. William took her hand, his anger giving way to protective determination. Now we make it clear that there are consequences for treating you poorly. We may not be able to reclaim the necklace, but we can certainly ensure that this kind of ambush doesn't happen again. As the day progressed, the royal family found itself divided in ways that hadn't been seen in years. Charles was torn between supporting his wife and maintaining peace with his heir. Camilla was energized by her success, but beginning to realize the full scope of the opposition she had created. William was angry and protective, while Catherine was hurt, but determined to handle the situation with grace. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force every member of the family to choose sides in a dispute that had started with jewelry, but had evolved into something much more fundamental about power, respect, and the future of the monarchy itself. 3 weeks after the gala, the royal family found themselves in an unprecedented situation. What had begun as a single evening's jewelry choice had evolved into a full-scale constitutional and family crisis that was testing the very foundations of the modern monarchy. The media attention had not subsided as palace officials had hoped. Instead, it had intensified, with royal commentators around the world analyzing every aspect of the necklace affair as it had come to be known. Opinion polls showed the British public was divided, with younger respondents generally supporting Catherine, while older demographics were more sympathetic to Camilla's position as queen consort. More concerning for palace officials was the international attention. The story had been picked up by major news outlets in America, Australia, Canada, and throughout Europe. Foreign correspondents were treating it as a window into the stability and effectiveness of the British monarchy, questioning whether the institution could maintain its relevance if it couldn't manage its own internal disputes. Rebecca Morrison, the head of palace communications, had spent 3 weeks in damage control mode, but she was now convinced that only direct action from the principals could resolve the situation. She had requested an urgent meeting with King Charles to present what she called strategic options for family reconciliation. "Your Majesty," she said, standing before Charles's desk with a thick folder of press clippings and polling data, "we've reached a tipping point. The story is no longer about jewelry. It's being framed as a fundamental question about the monarchy's ability to function as a modern institution." Charles looked exhausted. The past weeks had been among the most challenging of his reign, with constant pressure from multiple directions. William remained angry and distant. Camilla was frustrated by what she saw as unfair criticism. The Prime Minister's office continued to ask uncomfortable questions about royal protocol, and the public seemed to be choosing sides in a dispute that Charles wished had never become public in the first place. "What are your recommendations?" he asked. "Honestly, sir, a family meeting. All the principals in one room, with an agreement that whatever is decided there becomes final. No more public speculation, no more anonymous sources talking to the press, no more divided camps within the family." Charles knew she was right, but the prospect of getting everyone in the same room was daunting. William and Camilla had barely spoken since the gala, communicating only through him when necessary. Catherine had maintained her public schedule with perfect grace, but had declined several family gatherings where Camilla would be present. "Arrange it," Charles said finally. "This weekend at Sandringham. Tell them it's mandatory." At Windsor Castle, Catherine was preparing for her own difficult decision. She had spent 3 weeks watching the situation unfold, maintaining her public dignity while privately struggling with feelings of betrayal and displacement. The necklace itself had become secondary to what it represented, a challenge to her position within the family that she could no longer ignore. William found her in the castle's library, where she had been reading with unusual intensity. He noticed that she was holding a biography of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and he understood immediately what she was researching. "Learning about previous royal family disputes?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. "Learning about strength," Catherine replied. "About how the women in this family have historically handled challenges to their authority." William nodded, understanding her meaning. "And what have you learned?" Catherine closed the book and looked directly at her husband. "I've learned that sometimes being gracious isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight for your position, not because you want to, but because failing to do so weakens the entire institution." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Charles's private secretary, informing them of the mandatory family meeting at Sandringham. Both William and Catherine understood that this would be the moment when the crisis would either be resolved or escalated to a point of no return. That same afternoon, at Clarence House, Camilla was having her own moment of reflection. The excitement she had felt after the gala had gradually given way to a more complex understanding of what her actions had unleashed. She had wanted to assert her authority as queen consort, and she had certainly accomplished that goal. But the cost was proving higher than she had anticipated. Angela found her staring at the Chapman necklace, which had remained in its case since the gala. The diamonds seemed less brilliant somehow, as if the controversy surrounding them had dimmed their sparkle. "Are you having second thoughts, Your Majesty?" Angela asked gently. Camilla was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I'm having complicated thoughts," she said finally. "I don't regret asserting my rights as queen consort, but I'm beginning to understand that rights and relationships don't always align perfectly." The weekend at Sandringham arrived with typical Norfolk weather, cold, gray, and drizzling. The estate, which usually served as a refuge for the royal family, felt tense and formal as family members arrived for what everyone understood would be a crucial confrontation. Charles had arranged for the meeting to take place in the estate's main drawing room, a space that was grand enough to remind everyone of the institutional nature of their roles, but comfortable enough to encourage honest conversation. He had specifically requested that no staff be present except for his private secretary to take notes. William and Catherine arrived first, both impeccably dressed and carrying themselves with the dignity that had made them popular with the public. Catherine wore a simple navy dress with pearls, elegant but notably free of any jewelry that might send unintended messages. Camilla arrived with Charles, and the tension in the room immediately became palpable. She had chosen her outfit carefully as well. A burgundy suit with minimal jewelry, clearly intended to avoid any appearance of provocation. For several moments, the four of them sat in uncomfortable silence, each waiting for someone else to begin a conversation that no one wanted to have. Finally, Charles spoke. "I think we all understand why we're here," he said. "The past 3 weeks have been challenging for our family and for the monarchy as an institution. We need to find a path forward that respects everyone's position and restores family harmony." William responded first. "Papa, with respect, this isn't about finding a middle ground. This is about acknowledging that what happened was inappropriate and ensuring it doesn't happen again." "What happened," Camilla said, speaking for the first time, "was that the queen consort wore a piece from the crown jewels collection to an appropriate royal engagement. I fail to see how that requires an apology." Catherine had been watching this exchange carefully, and now she made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of remaining diplomatically silent, as she usually did during family conflicts, she spoke with quiet authority. "Camilla," she said, her voice steady and clear, "you're absolutely correct that you have the right to wear any piece in the crown collection. But rights and wisdom aren't the same thing, and they certainly aren't the same as kindness." The directness of Catherine's statement shifted the entire dynamic in the room. This was not the diplomatic, deferential Catherine that the family was used to. This was a future queen asserting herself with unmistakable authority. "That necklace," Catherine continued, "was given to me by the late queen with specific ceremony and intention. You know this because you were present when it happened. Choosing to wear it wasn't just about asserting your position. It was about diminishing mine." Camilla's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. "Catherine, I never intended to diminish your position. I was simply trying to embrace my own." "Then, let's talk about what that means," Catherine replied. "Because if embracing your position requires taking symbols that have become personally significant to other family members, then we have a fundamental problem that goes far beyond jewelry." Charles watched this exchange with growing concern. He had never seen Catherine speak so directly to Camilla, and he could see that his wife was struggling with the criticism. William, however, was watching his wife with obvious pride. This was the Catherine he knew in private, intelligent, strong, and perfectly capable of holding her own in any confrontation. He had sometimes worried that her public diplomacy might be mistaken for weakness, but today she was demonstrating exactly why she would make an effective queen. "Catherine is right," William said, supporting his wife. "This was never about legal rights or protocol. This was about considering the feelings of other family members and making choices that strengthen the family rather than divide it." Camilla was silent for several moments, clearly processing the criticism she was receiving. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. "You're both right," she said, surprising everyone. "I didn't know what that necklace meant to Catherine, and I chose to wear it anyway because I was tired of feeling like I had to ask permission to claim my full role as queen consort." The admission hung in the air, and Catherine could see the vulnerability beneath Camilla's defiance. For the first time since the gala, she began to understand what had really motivated her stepmother-in-law's choice. "Camilla," Catherine said gently, "you never needed my permission or anyone else's permission to be queen consort. That title is yours by right and by marriage. But being queen consort doesn't mean erasing the contributions of other family members." Charles had been listening to this exchange with growing hope. For the first time in weeks, the women in his family were talking to each other instead of about each other. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we can find a way forward that acknowledges both Camilla's authority as queen consort and Catherine's special relationship with certain pieces in the collection." William leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Charles looked at both women before continuing. "I'm proposing that we establish clear guidelines for the crown jewels collection that respect both institutional hierarchy and personal significance. Certain pieces that have been publicly associated with specific family members should require consultation before being transferred or worn by someone else." It was a compromise that gave everyone something while requiring everyone to give up something as well. Camilla would retain full access to the collection as queen consort, but would agree to consider the personal significance of certain pieces. Catherine would have her special relationship with meaningful jewelry acknowledged, but would accept that the ultimate decision-making authority rested with Charles as king. "And the necklace?" Catherine asked quietly. Camilla was silent for a long moment before answering. "Should be returned to your care," she said finally. "Not because you demanded it, but because it's the right thing to do." The gesture was more meaningful because it was voluntary, and Catherine could see the difficulty it represented for Camilla. "Thank you," she said simply. But Camilla wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "I want it understood that this isn't an admission that I was wrong to assert my position as queen consort. I was right about that. I was simply wrong about the method." Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Norfolk countryside where his family had found peace for generations. "Then, we're agreed," he said. "Camilla retains full authority as queen consort. Catherine's special relationships with certain pieces are acknowledged and respected, and future decisions about significant transfers will be made with family consultation." The four of them spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details of their agreement, and by evening, they had established a framework that everyone could accept. More importantly, they had aired grievances and concerns that had been festering beneath the surface of family relationships for months. That evening, as they gathered for dinner at Sandringham, the atmosphere was notably lighter. The crisis had forced all of them to have conversations they had been avoiding and to establish boundaries that should have been clarified years earlier. Camilla approached Catherine before they went into dinner. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I respect you enormously. What I did was never about diminishing that respect." Catherine smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was genuine. "I know," she replied, "and I want you to know that I support your role as queen consort completely. I just needed to know that my role was secure as well." The following Monday, Buckingham Palace released a brief statement indicating that recent questions about protocol regarding the crown jewels collection have been resolved through family discussion and consultation. The statement was deliberately vague, but it served its purpose of indicating that the crisis had been resolved internally. More significantly, both Camilla and Catherine resumed their public schedules with obvious renewed confidence. Camilla's appearances as queen consort carried a new authority that was no longer defensive or apologetic. Catherine's engagements displayed a subtle but unmistakable strength that suggested she had found new comfort in asserting her own position within the family. The Chapman necklace was quietly returned to Catherine's collection, where it resumed its place as one of her signature pieces. But the real resolution of the crisis wasn't about jewelry. It was about a family learning to navigate the complex dynamics of a modern monarchy where multiple strong women held significant positions. 6 months later, at the state opening of Parliament, both women appeared in magnificent jewelry from the crown collection. Camilla wearing the diamond diadem as queen consort, Catherine wearing the Chapman necklace as the future queen. The image of them together, both confident and regal, became one of the defining photographs of Charles's early reign. The crisis that had begun with a single evening's jewelry choice had ultimately strengthened both women's positions within the family and the monarchy. Camilla had asserted her authority as queen consort and found her voice in a role that had initially intimidated her. Catherine had demonstrated that her diplomatic grace masked a steel core that would serve her well as queen. And Charles had learned that sometimes the most difficult conversations are also the most necessary ones, especially in a family where personal relationships and institutional responsibilities are forever intertwined. The Chapman necklace continued to sparkle at royal events, but now it carried with it the story of 4 people who had learned to balance power, family, and tradition in the complex world of modern monarchy. It had become more than jewelry. It had become a symbol of how even the most difficult family disputes could be resolved with honesty, respect, and genuine care for the institution they all served.